Hello there, welcome to Lean Lunch. This is your host, Aaron Eden, and I have a special guest, Brian Andrews, with us today. I'm going to go through a quick introduction and overview of Moves the Needle for just a moment, and then I'm going to have Brian introduce himself. I can't talk today. It's going to be a long session. So Moves the Needle, we are all about helping employees and leaders inside the enterprise behave more like entrepreneurs. We do that through a series of different experiential workshops, coaching engagements, more traditional consulting type work. And if you're part of a large enterprise and you're in a situation where maybe some of your internal functional teams are getting in the way, they're slowing you down, keeping you from innovating as effectively as you could be. That might be a good situation to ask us to come and help. That's just one example. There's many of them, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but be on the lookout for that. That's an opportunity to apply some of the things that you're going to learn in this session and many of the other sessions we've done in your organization. A couple upcoming events. Next week in San Francisco, I will be conducting a customer Zoom workshop at the Lean Startup Circle. So check that out on the Lean Startup Circle website, also on the movesneedle.com events page. You can get to it from there. I think the ticket price is $20, maybe it's $30, somewhere in that ballpark. Should be a really awesome session. We're gonna dive into how to really get very specific about who your target customer is, whether that's a new startup that you're launching or maybe a new product or a new thing that you're working on in the enterprise. It works in both situations. Our Lean Lunch on the 29th, we're going to have Sam Evans from Brand Trust. They're a really forward-thinking design thinking group. It's not just that, but I'm oversimplifying. Anyway, they've got some really amazing human-centered design techniques that they're applying. We'll learn a lot from them. On September 3rd, we are going to have another Google Hangout, which is the Lean Branding Panel. We're going to have Roz Mancinelli, Jeremiah Gardner, and Brant Cooper on to discuss application of Lean principles with branding in your companies. And then September the 12th, our Lean Lunch will be with Karsten Newberry, who is the GM of Siemens PLM Software. Talk about how he and his teams are applying some of these principles in their rather large enterprise. So lots of opportunities to learn and connect, so please check those out. You can always see all of the events that we've got going on up on the Moves the Needle events page. And that's the end of my spiel. So we are going to dive head first into learning from Brian Andrews. So let me start by just Brian. Why don't I have you introduce yourself real quick? Tell us all about your background and why we should be listening to you.
Well, thanks for inviting me to join you all. I think you can tell I'm from Texas because I said y'all. So I live in Dallas, Texas right now. I own a company called LoyaltyRocks, which I started just a few months ago. I had spent 9 years in consulting earlier in my career when my kids were much younger and had to get out because the travel was just too much. And after 16 years in the corporate world, I'm back. My focus is on helping organizations accelerate their ability to deliver awesome customer experiences. And Lean Startup, some of the principles associated with Lean Startup is definitely in the mix in terms of how that gets accomplished. I was fortunate in my career when I started that I started in an old school manufacturing company running or supervising a bunch of union employees, and they did things the traditional way they've always done things. It was old school manufacturing, batch. Cycle time was about 6 weeks from the time we took the steel off the big rolls of steel, we punched it, and we turned it into a finished product. a bunch of us were introduced to the Japanese manufacturing techniques, things like Lean and Toyota Production System. This was in the mid-'80s. And we started to apply those techniques and transformed that manufacturing plant from a cycle time of 6 to 8 weeks into about 6 hours for us to complete from the time we punched the steel to a completed product. So quite a transformation. And the plant that I worked in, we went from, are you getting any kind of, is the video or the audio still okay?
Yep, audio is great.
Okay. We went from kind of worst to first in terms of all the plant metrics for the company. And that transformation was a really kind of happy accident for me in my career, in that I could see this contrast between the old way of doing things and this new way of doing things, which was focused on Lean. Again, this was in the mid-'80s, and the bigger transformation I saw was with the people that were involved on the factory floor. These were people that were not really happy about their job. They didn't have a lot of pride and dignity, and this transformation caused them to be a part of something special, and also caused them to really understand their work and feel great about what they were doing, because they could see things more wing to wing. So that drove me into consulting, because there weren't a lot of people, kind of like the experience you've had, Aaron, where there were people that were familiar with it, but not a lot of people that had actually applied it and understood it well. And that drove me into consulting. So I did it for 9 years, working for big firms like Coopers & Lybrand, and applying the same kind of transformation with companies like the Ford Motor Company and AT&T and Procter & Gamble and a lot of other smaller companies. And some of them went on to win the Deming Prize and the Baldrige Award, and they were subjects of books, which was all terrific. But what was missing for me in those 9 years of consulting was the focus on the customer. So a lot of it was around internal efficiencies and how to drive cost out and how to lower inventories and increase turns and things like that. It wasn't until I went back into industry, went back to Compaq, HP, and I picked up not only the process improvement role, but also the customer satisfaction, that I got a heavy dose of understanding what's important to customers and incorporating that all into the improvement. At Intuit, I was at Intuit for 11 and a half years, and I took those skills, and then, as you know, Aaron, we were the first company to launch NPS after Fred Reichheld came up with the concept. So I was involved in the early stages of that because I had a strong customer experience background, and I saw the connection to process improvement, and I ran the market research function. But at Intuit, that NPS experience and that customer obsessed kind of customer focus and really understanding what customers want, not what they say, but through observation and all those other techniques. And then the advent of Design for Delight, and then the return of or the introduction of Eric Ries coming in with us around Lean Startup. To me, it was kind of full circle, because after about 30 years, we were applying. What was really exciting for me is we were applying these Lean principles to something that that we were doing within the company, which was developing new products, developing software, and it was an extension of the work that we were also doing around the Toyota Production System, which I was championing that within our business unit that I was in. So Eric will always say that he basically took these techniques from Toyota and applied them to software development, which I think is really awesome. So the cool thing for me is that I think these basic principles have been around since the 40s and 50s, because Dr. Deming actually went to Japan and taught the Japanese these Japanese manufacturing techniques, and a lot of it was around coming up with a theory, testing the theory, analyzing the results, making changes based on what you learned, which sounds a lot like, the Eric Ries methodology. So it's plan, do, check, act, and with an emphasis on using actual output and data versus survey data as people's opinion, which I think is a big change at Intuit. So anyway, that's a little bit of my story. And then when I left Intuit, I decided, hey, this is what I want to do. I just want to help companies get better at delivering, understanding what's important to their customers, and then delivering awesome experiences and driving improvement within the organization to enable them to consistently deliver delight. So that's what my focus is on, and also there's a cultural change element associated with that.
That's really, really powerful. One term that you threw out that I want to make sure that folks are aware of what it means. Can you talk a little bit about what NPS is, and just give a little bit of context around it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So NPS stands for Net Promoter. Now it stands for Net Promoter System. Originally, it was Net Promoter Score, and it was on a 0 to 10 scale. You survey your customers and see how likely they are to recommend the product or service to a friend or a colleague. And those that give you a score of 0 to 6 are generally referred to as detractors. The 7 and 8s are kind of passives. And then the 9s and 10s are what you're aiming for. Those are the promoters. And if you've got a company that a large part of your business is based on word of mouth, understanding your Net Promoter Score, understanding how to drive improvements to your Net Promoter has a big impact on your ability to grow. Bain research shows that the Net Promoter loyalty leaders within any market grows at twice the rate of the average market. So if you're in a 4% growth market, if you're the loyalty leader, you're typically growing at about 8%. If you're in a 10% market, if you're a loyalty leader, you're 20%. So it's important to understand that, and Bain did a lot of research with Satmetrics and came up with this metric, and it was highly correlated to growth. There are other customer satisfaction metrics that are interesting, but they have zero correlation to growth. Fred Reichheld, who's the father of the Net Promoter Score, did some research with the University of Michigan Customer Satisfaction Index and found basically zero correlation between high satisfaction and growth when they did a scatter plot of all the data. So the Net Promoter Score seems to be more predictive, and it makes sense, and it made a lot of sense to Intuit, which is why we adopted it, because most of our products were based on strong word of mouth, not fancy advertising campaigns or slick salespeople. It was based on people loving the product and telling others about the product, which fuels the growth, versus hating the product and not renewing and telling other people bad things, which is a downward spiral. So that's the Net Promoter Score. We were an early adopter in Intuit, and now it's very widespread across the company or across the world. Companies are using it, and you'll also see it in some of Eric Ries's stuff. It shows up under one of the ways that you measure whether you're making progress is your NPS going up?
Yeah, I think one of the important core concepts that is lightly touched on in the Lean Startup book is the engine of growth, right? What is the way that you're going to get your business to grow? Is it word of mouth? Is it I'm spacing the other ones, but there are other ways of approaching that, the viral coefficients, those types of things. So I think it does align really nicely to that. Does it go deeper than that though? How else do you see these concepts of customer experience and process improvement really aligning with the principles of Lean Startup?
Well, I think one of the things we did within the business unit I was in Intuit was we looked at how to rapidly get insights so we could make smarter investments and decisions. So anything, the core principle of Lean Startup is you're not sure, you're uncertain about something. So how are you going to quickly understand and create more certainty? And you do that by testing, and you want to test in a low cost way where you can get more certainty, and then you can move on to your next test. So we had an issue with our IVR, which a lot of companies do. Customers generally don't like the IVR system at call centers. And it would take us, if we wanted to make a change to the IVR, it would take us about 6 weeks for us to make that change by the time you put it in. And we really had no idea. It was a total guess whether that change was going to yield a better customer experience or not. So what we did, applying at the time, it wasn't lean startup principles, but these will sound very familiar. We applied Toyota production system principles, and we tried to figure out how could we test this very inexpensively, so we could create a script that would work and not invest 6 weeks and find out something didn't work. So what we did was we created what we called a human IVR. So we just simply had a human test the script as if it was the IVR and ask people to push buttons, and then we told people this was just a test, and then we asked, and we would see how people responded to that human IVR, and then we would iterate based on those learnings. And then within a week, we had solid confidence that the changes we wanted to make in the IVR were going to yield a much better customer experience. So that technique sounds a lot like Lean Startup, right? Where you are doing something very lightweight, FACO kind of front end, FACO back end stuff. But you're learning because there's so much uncertainty. Before you make a big bet, how can you make a bunch of small little bets? So what I try to get organizations to do is to think about, not only in the product development side, but also the process improvement side, how can we understand and make small little bets, learn from them before we make big bets, and then get out of the politics of what people think is the right thing to do, and let the data, let the customers determine what the right things are to do, and let that guide the improvements that should be made within an organization.
I love it. What are some of the? Do you remember what some of the outcomes were from that human IVR test?
Well, I know we dramatically made a better experience for the customers, and we rerouted them into the right place. One of the big issues we had was call transfers and people getting routed into the wrong thing, pushing the wrong button, and then that obviously is a bad experience. It's a form of rework. I think it was something like 40–50% reduction in misdirected calls, and some of those are the human errors, not listening very well to the IVR, but a lot of it was just the effectiveness of the IVR itself and the script. So I think we saw about half of about 50% reduction in the misdirected calls, which obviously creates a better experience for the customer.
Absolutely. Yeah, probably cost savings for the call center and many other positive impacts.
Exactly.
What were some of the issues or challenges that you guys ran into in doing that?
Well, I don't think there were a lot of issues. I think they talk about necessity being the mother of a lot of inventions. I think when we were starting with the Toyota production system, I think the challenge for all of us in this space is getting people comfortable with just doing stuff, just getting out of the conference room, getting out of the comfort zone of the whiteboard and the flip charts, and being okay with being wrong with whatever they're working on. So I think we all grew up in a time where having the perfect answer was kind of the mark of how successful you are, and flipping that to being okay with nobody having a good answer. Maybe you have a good idea, but let's go test it and see if that answer makes sense. That whole mindset, it took us quite a while to get people used to just going out, because I think people get pretty good at and get used to sitting in a conference room and arguing philosophical points versus now I need to learn a new skill, which I used to be good at that. I used to be good at arguing in a conference room, a philosophical point. Now I need to learn a new skill, which is to go out and experiment, collect data, and share the results, and then iterate. And boy, I'm not used to doing that. I just, I'd rather sit in here and argue. So it's trying to get the organization to move from that old state of this is what I'm comfortable doing, and these are the people that are most successful are people that are good debaters and like can make counterpoints, even if it's just philosophical, versus the people that are experimental and people that are scientific. And even at Intuit, Aaron, I think Scott and Brad and the rest of the leadership team, they're continuing to go through this transformation of what makes a great leader and what we expect of a great leader. It used to be great leaders were like Caesar, and they'd give thumbs up and thumbs down to ideas, and moving from a more scientific group where it's creating experiments and letting the data make decisions is a big transformation for any company, including a very progressive company like Intuit.
And how was that transition for you personally? I know you were in a senior leadership position at that time. How was it for you?
Well, for me, because I started my career in this space, it was a little bit probably easier for me. The frustrating thing was for me to try to bring some of my colleagues along to a systems approach, a scientific way of thinking. Deming has four principles of profound knowledge. One of them is a system of a theory of learning and knowledge, and if you read it, you're going to read it and say, wow, this is all around lean startup. It's creating a hypothesis, going out and test it, getting the data. Plan, do, check, act is the cycle, or plan, do, study, act, he used to call it. So when we adopted, unfortunately, what we did with a lot of the process excellence stuff at the beginning at Intuit is we applied it all to cost reduction, which poisoned a lot of people on this approach and technique. If we would have applied it to delivering delight for customers in a culture that values that, I think we would have been much better off. But if it's around stripping cost out and ways to strip cost out, and sometimes at the expense of the customer, it poisoned things a little bit. So when I saw the redo, not the redo, but the introduction of Lean Startup at Intuit, I thought it was incredibly awesome. When I ran product management for several years within the accounting professionals division, one of the first questions I asked the product managers was, of the 2,000 hours you spend with in the business each year, how many hours are you with customers experimenting, watching them use the product? And the answer was like less than 20 hours, less than 20 of their 2,000 hours that they spent. And I'm like, how are we going to get better if you're here all the time? If you're in your office, they would talk to customers and they would deal with customer complaints. I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about pure learning time with the customer. And if you're spending 1% of your time, it's like, what the hell are you spending your other 99% of your time doing? And how can you be a great product manager if you're spending 99% of your time inside the office talking and debating with your colleagues? And there's some of that work you have to get done, but sure, kind of flipping that and having people be able to see some of the madness associated with that was a big part of the transition that I had a great time doing with the team. And we made some incredible strides in there, and some of the people that came out of that are people like Rachel Evans that you know, and that came out of that whole experience of really getting focused on the customer and the experience and spending time with them and figuring out not what they say is important, but what they actually do, not relying on surveys, but observation, all those type of things. So to me, it wasn't a huge transition. It was a little frustrating because, you know, it had been a part of my DNA for a while, but you know, it was all good. It was all good.
Do you have any tips or tricks for other leaders as they're trying to get their peers to come along? Maybe they already are thinking or behaving this way, and they need to do what you did and get their peers to come along. What tips would you have for them?
Well, I think the best thing, I'm a big believer that people change because not because of what you say, but they have to. They change because they want to change, and it's all through self-discovery is how people drive and make changes. So I always found that it wasn't really their problem, it was my problem. It was my problem in that I didn't create the right way to have them self-discover that they needed to change. So I always viewed it back to me and my challenge, and I did that with the people that reported to me as well. I knew the only way they were going to change is if I could create this mechanism of self-discovery where whether it's through a customer experience or some kind of video or some kind of meaningful experience or some kind of questions that I would ask, but they had to make the change themselves. So I like to get people exposed to situations where they're gonna feel not only from their head but also their heart that they have to change. Either what they do, the questions they ask, how they lead needs to be modified or changed. And that started, I mean, to me, I viewed it as not something just for my peers, but all the way up in the organization, all the way up to the CEO. If I saw things that I didn't think were right, I would try to create some self-discovery there and figure out how to create an experience where it will modify behaviors even with the CEO. So I think that's philosophically you need an approach. That approach has always worked for me, is to figure out how to get people to kind of see the light. And if they haven't saw the light, it's not their problem, it's my problem because I haven't engineered that experience.
It's interesting. Yeah, it seems you can almost apply the same principles that we're talking about to that change management journey of trying to influence your peers, right? Understanding what's important to them, doing some of that customer empathy work with them to understand how can you create an experience that will help them, you know, see how this might be valuable to them, and then, you know, try that, see if it works or not, and then iterate based on what you learn.
Yeah, there's a quote from I got this. One of the things I did at Intuit is I ran the NPS community across all of the business units, and I represented Intuit on Bain's Net Promoter Loyalty Forum. And these were companies like eBay, Vanguard, JetBlue, TD Bank, Chick-fil-A, Apple Retail was involved, and Lego was another company involved. And it really world-class companies that focus on customer experience and believe that word of mouth, delighting customers is the way to growth. And American Express was another company. Great organizations. But we would go to a company for a couple days and learn from their senior leaders. We'd observe. We'd go into their operations. We would have some facilitated discussion. And we actually hosted, the one we hosted a couple of them, but the one that I was responsible for, our whole session was on design thinking. So we brought in Karin, and we brought in some folks from GE, and the guy that wrote the book, Little Bets. Anyway, when I was at Lego in Denmark, the president, CEO of the company, had this quote, which I brought back to Brad and shared it with him. Intuit CEO, but he basically said, um, so the backstory was Lego is a privately held company. They were bleeding cash at an incredible rate, ready to go bankrupt. They had lost their focus on the customer, and the new CEO came in and wanted them to get focused back on the customer. And he had this saying which said, um, instead of thinking our way into new ways of acting, we needed to act our way into new ways of thinking. So they just started to do it. They just, did the Nike thing where they just did it. They just started to do things, even if it was uncomfortable, with customers, and that would modify their thinking. So the act of doing started reformulating the way that they thought versus, again, being in a conference room and trying to think out the perfect plan for how they were going to be customer focused. They just needed to go out and start to do it. So a big part of, I think, what all of us can do is lead by example and just get out there and be with customers, and there's so much joy associated with that, as you know. I mean, once people get a little taste of that, it's a little bit like heroin. I mean, it's like, wow, at first I'm kind of nervous about being with customers, but I love it. I mean, my best days at Intuit were when I was out with customers. Those were my most favorite days in the company. And same with Compaq, and HP when I was there. So I think that is the coolest thing to do. And so I think if you can create that environment to make it easy for people to spend time with customers, it starts to reshape the way that they think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was running and facilitating design thinking sessions, oftentimes, anytime you'd see the energy level get low with a certain team, you'd know that was the time to try to get them in front of a customer, whether that was finding somebody for them or kicking them out to get them in front of a customer. It was like, as soon as they start kind of spinning a little bit, you go, all right, time for some more customer energy.
Exactly.
I love it. So with regard to innovation, and we've talked about customer experience. We've talked a little bit about process improvement and lean startup principles, and definitely there's quite a bit of overlap between these different concepts. What are you really excited about for the future? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of things kind of coming together. What are you excited about?
Well, I'm excited about the convergence of all of these things, and I think that more and more experiences are connected to. I tend to think in terms of mobile devices and the advent of how experiences are incorporating this portable PC that people are carrying around in their pocket. You think about things like Uber or Lyft, some of those experiences which historically had nothing to do with a computer or nothing to do with a phone. Now the phone is a core part of how you get transportation in a big city, and the way that you measure success, the way that you provide feedback to the driver or the driver provides feedback to you is really pretty interesting. In some ways, it's kind of going back to the old West and the general store and how people knew each other and how your reputation mattered and how their reputation mattered, and if they wanted a line of credit, the guy at the store would give them a line of credit because they knew Aaron was a good guy. It's kind of going back from an impersonal world to something that's much more connected, where if you do Airbnb, a lot of people have relationships with the host of the properties on Airbnb. So exactly. I'm kind of excited about how all this works together, because I think it allows for so much more rapid kind of experimentation than you had in the older days, where people would fill out big long surveys. I don't know if you've got a survey lately, but if you get a survey that's like more than 3 questions, nobody's filling those things out anymore. So the days of being polite and filling out a survey. I got one from GM after I got a car a couple of years ago, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" It was about a half-inch thick. They wanted to know everything about my experience and my preferences, and it's just like ridiculous. So I think companies like Facebook, companies like Google that are using behavioral, the kind of the big data, the behavioral stuff on the back end to predict or to create hypotheses around what needs to change to create a better experience. I think that's where a lot of the innovation is going. So my orientation tends to be a little bit technology oriented around where innovation's going, but I think we brought in, as you may remember, we brought in some folks from Facebook. They got a group of data scientists that they basically follow this. Oh, hey Ben.
Hey guys.
How are you?
Sorry I was late. Just running some Friday interference.
No problem.
Thanks for joining us. Keep going, Brian.
But anyway, they create they create hypotheses and basically follow the same approach, but they don't rely on surveys. They're looking at actual customer behavioral changes that are a result of experiments that they're running to see if they spend more time online or if they invite more friends or whatever the outcome is they're shooting for, which I think is the way of the future for at least technology innovation, trying to understand through analytics and actual behavior what tests you can run to improve the outcomes that you're shooting for. I think that's where a lot of the technology innovation will happen.
I love it. It's definitely things are definitely moving very quickly. So I think that's really important. So I've got one last question, and I think Ben hopping on is our signal that I think maybe the Intuit team that we're going to get the opportunity to coach maybe around the corner. But to kind of put a bow on this one, I think from two perspectives, what advice would you give folks out there that are trying to make some progress in this area? And when I say from two perspectives, I mean from a leader's perspective as well as for more like individual contributors or maybe less senior leaders. What advice would you give to those two groups?
So a couple. I mean, one, and this isn't to plug your organization. I mean, you didn't ask me to do it, and I won't. And that's not why. But I think, Scott Cook was a big believer in that you should learn from the wheel makers. So there are people that are out there that are good at this, that do it well, that know what they're doing, and it helps to have a trail guide. If you're going to climb Everest, you'd rather have a Sherpa with you than climbing it by yourself. No guarantee you're going to survive or be successful, but I think your odds go up a lot if you've got somebody that's done it and you engage with a trail guide. The second is, I would say, and that's an accelerator. I would say the second thing to do is just to do it. It's back to that quote that we were talking about with the CEO from Lego, which is you need to act your way into new ways of thinking. So just get out of the building, start to apply some of the approaches, some of the techniques, understand what is a major assumption that you've got, a major leap of faith assumption, and figure out a way to go test it, get actual feedback, and then learn, iterate, and get better and better. It's not unlike going to the gym. It helps to have a trainer, but the first step is getting off the couch and leaving the building and going to the gym.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Actually, I think Mr. Blank over there from Intuit, I remember him telling a story, something about a fire. What was that analogy, Ben?
Oh yeah. Well, sometimes we like to say, if the building's on fire, or you perceive it to be, you've got to really, you can run in any direction. It actually doesn't matter. but what you can't do is stand still. And so I like what you said about just taking some action and getting out there and doing something, almost anything. Even if it feels like you don't really know what you're doing, that's perfectly fine. Teams never do when they start, so it's more important just to take action. Any action at all is better than spending too much time talking about it or chatting about it. Even I think, Aaron, in our own journey, I remember here at Intuit, the first couple of things we did 4 years ago was really us. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just went out there and started getting busy, and then over time, you learn how it works, and you engage experts to learn from them, and then you make it your own. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and I think to your point, you guys also were very good at getting feedback, and based on that feedback, you changed things, right? I mean, so you were following the principles that you were teaching, which is how to rapidly get feedback, and then you experimented the next time, the next session with some changes. They either worked or they didn't work. You either kept them or you improved them, or you threw them out. So that closed loop feedback is so important, and that's, again, Aaron, back to what we were talking about. That's another core element to either the Toyota production system, the lean startup, or a good customer experience system. Responding quickly to feedback is critical.
Absolutely. It looks like the EasyBiz team is joining us for some coaching. How are you guys?
We're doing good, thanks.
Awesome. Let's see. So we've got Daniel, Esha, and Evan. Is that right?
Yep.
Cool. And I think let's see. There was also who else? Oh, that's everybody, right? Is there somebody else?
We have 2 members of our team who couldn't join us today.
Oh, they'll be missing out. Okay, cool. No worries. Awesome. So why don't we have you guys? Why doesn't one of you quickly introduce your team, what you're working on, and kind of tee up how we can help?
All right, sounds good. So we are Team EasyBiz. We have a little bit of feedback problems.
How about now? Have a lot of feedback problems. Oh, we lost Daniel. And Esha's there, but muted. Cool. Evan and Daniel are with Esha. Esha, do you have a microphone? Get through some technical issues for a second here. Ben, can you quickly introduce the EasyBiz team? I don't know if you know the details of what they're working on, but at least introduce who they are and how it fits in with what's going on over at Intuit.
Okay, yeah, and hey guys, we can't hear you on the microphone, so maybe double check your microphone's working, you've got sound on, all that good stuff. So we can't hear you. You'll have to pantomime. So we can see you, but we can't hear you. So this team is part of a group of, and guys, correct me if I'm. Oh, there you go.
How's this?
There you go. Now we got it.
Sounds good.
Take over. Introduce yourself. You guys tell us what you're doing here at Intuit this summer really quickly, and then we'll jump right into it.
All right, sounds good. So when we started about 2 months ago, we were thrust into what Intuit calls the lean startup. It is a 2-day intense, all in-depth experience where we are given a challenge and over the course of 2 days have to come up with a solution to this challenge and go out and meet a whole bunch of customers, run some very rapid experiments, and try to iterate and expand on that.
Is this what Intuit calls the Lean Start In?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
I hear it's awesome.
Yeah,
It is.
it's fantastic. I think in the 2 days you learn a lot about entrepreneurship. That it's just a great experience. That they just kind of put it all together. You do experimentation. You know, identify your pain points, your leap of faith assumptions, and so they really do a good job here in terms of fostering that kind of understanding of how to start a business and really understanding the lean startup principles. And so from then on, which was actually a couple months ago, end of June, we did this program, this intensive program, and from then we've kind of been building upon our product and our idea, and now we have a very minimal viable product that we'd love to show you guys, like as we start to explain our product to you. But why don't we go ahead and start off by just kind of saying. So, have we introduced ourselves?
No.
No.
So
we'll do that first.
Yeah, go quick, guys, because you've only got 12 minutes.
yes.
Okay. Cool.
So
Hi, my name is Isha. I am a developer intern at Intuit this summer, working in cloud security, and I currently go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, studying computer science, and will be a rising junior.
Yeah.
Daniel, UCSD, iOS developer.
Go San Diego.
Yes.
Hey, my name is Evan. I go to UC Davis. I'm a developer as well for QuickBooks and Now View My Paycheck, which is another product I get to.
Awesome.
So the challenge that we were given was how can we get more students to create small businesses? And our take on that, our solution was we wanted to create an application that helps people cover the getting started process a lot more smoothly. So what we started with was the idea that the documentation and paperwork for starting a small business, whether it be a restaurant or a retail store, is very complex and a very long and arduous process. We wanted to create a very simplified system to help them along this process and essentially chop off time, effort, and energy. And through the 2 days of the Lean Start In, we reached out to a number of different small business owners who have started startups and tried to figure out what the hardest process was. And we've kind of narrowed down to an MVP that is a web application that helps you figure out what kind of business you need to start, and then helps you fill out the initial documents and help submit them to the government for filing.
Cool. And where? Tell us really quick where you are today and how we can help.
Absolutely. So so initially, actually, we were kind of targeting tech startups, but then after we spoke to a bunch of students at Stanford and got some feedback from the web, because that was one of our experiments, we learned that a lot of startups, a lot of student startups, tech startups, they have a bunch of resources. So they have VCs, they have incubator clubs, they are able to find ways to get money. So we decided to pivot, and now we're kind of going along the path of helping any person or any group of individuals who are pursuing a side hobby and would like to turn their side hobby into a profitable business. So it could be anybody who contracts on the side, maybe somebody who makes jewelry, so like a service business, service industry, and that's kind of what we want to target. And so at this point, and I'd like to introduce, so another member just came actually.
Hi,
This is Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Introduce yourself, Matt.
I'm Matt Weber. I'm a student, a law student at UCLA. Sorry, I was just in another meeting, so I'm sorry for coming late.
Not allowed to work.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
So where we are right now.
As you guys know, 9 minutes left.
Right.
Okay.
So where we are right now is we have gotten a lot of feedback about our MVP, but not necessarily from customers. And so from your conversation earlier this morning, we know that we need to get this product in front of customers and get some rapid feedback on it. But we're struggling to find customers who are in the midst of starting a small business. So we think that if you guys might have some advice on how do you find your target customer, essentially.
So the question is how to find more of your target customer?
Yes.
Yes. So I think one thing if I remember from your team correctly, you have a large variety of potential customers that could use this solution. So you may be in a position where you haven't quite narrowed in on which group of specific customers you want to start with. And so you talked about maybe startups versus a restaurant versus some other group. I think the first step is for you to pick a very, very hyper-specific customer segment that you'd want to begin with, and then that'll make it a heck of a lot easier to figure out where those people are. And you might just have to use your best guess on what that group might be. If it's not tech people because they don't have a lot of forms to process, maybe it's a restaurant because they have a lot of stuff with new employees that have to have food handler licenses and all this kind of crap. I think zooming in first will help you answer, okay, well now where do those people hang out? And the simple answer is you could just go to their stores, but a more savvy way to do it would be to start to think about where those specific customers would hang out, who they know, what blogs or message boards or message lists, any of these places that are already out there, they may be hanging out. And then I think second, the thing I seem to have a lot of success with, especially in the early stages, is ask everybody you know as often as you can if they know somebody who is your target customer. And I'm talking like your personal friends. I guarantee you, if it's any sort of product that is even remotely a normal business, very quickly you'll be able to find 100 people via 100 of your friends that are exactly this customer segment. Reach out to them, ask them if you can just chat with them for 20 minutes to get their valuable feedback on something that you're working on. Don't tell them what you're working on, but use your personal networks and the networks of your friends. I guarantee you can find your first 100 customers that way, no problem.
Yeah, and this is Brian. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to jump in or not, but
please do.
Yeah, go for it.
Certainly, just to build in on what Ben said, and certainly Facebook and connections between, if you got five of you and you each have 1,000 Facebook friends, you're going to find, even using that network, there's going to be people that are, that's a very rapid way to get. But I would just question whether that is really the audience. It sounded like the problem was getting more people to start businesses, not making it easier for people that have already decided to start a business and simplifying their life. It's getting more. So you might want to try to find people that would like to, but because the more is not going to, the people that want to start a business are going to start a business. Zuckerberg was going to start a business whether you simplified as creating forms or not for Facebook. You're going to want people that are kind of on the margin. If the outcome is creating more college students that start small businesses, you're going to want to find people. I think, to Ben's point, the narrow focus would be people that are kind of want to but are unsure, and that would be the group that would cross the chasm over to actually doing it and trying to figure out why they're not doing it, and testing whatever solutions you have with them, because that seems to be the marginal group, not the group that's already down the path of starting a business.
Yeah, that's a great point, because building on that, Brian, I think what you're saying is that you're looking for those people who are about to actually exhibit the behavior. There's something holding them back, but they want to do it, and that would be the absolute perfect person to reach out to. I think that's spot on. And I always tell teams, go more narrow than you think. So if it is college students who are thinking about starting a business, is it people who want to open a bar versus people who want to do college tours, or versus somebody who wants to do tutoring? Think hyper specific. I mean, it may actually be hard to find them, but that's okay. You'll have a better chance when you narrow it down. Exactly as Brian's saying. That's good advice.
So one thing that I do actually want to ask on behalf of our group, and we've kind of struggled with this a little bit, do you guys understand where we're coming from in terms of our pain point? Because for a while now, we've been kind of saying we want to help businesses who are struggling, with the financial and the business processes, so are struggling with the paperwork. So we want to give them, we have a very narrow scope right now in that we want to give them an articles of incorporation, depending on what incorporation they might be. So an S corp, a C corp, an LLC, whatever that might be. We want to give them this document. We also want to help them register their company with the state. We want to give them a tax ID. So that's kind of how we want to help them create their small business, and then kind of funnel that into its ecosystem with the hope of expanding it.
Yeah, so my answer would be, if that makes sense, if that's why people don't start small businesses. I'm not sure I would just question that hypothesis. It's totally testable, but is that why someone doesn't start a small business, because the paperwork's too much of a hassle? Or are there other reasons that are more important that you could overcome? So is that the biggest? If you did that, would it cause people to start businesses? I don't know. It's testable, but I don't.
I tend to agree. It's sort of like, if you're asking, do we believe that there's actually an important problem there? Is that kind of the essence of your question?
Yes.
Kinda, a little bit, yeah.
So then, how would you say it's testable? What kind of experiment would you recommend implementing if we found some customers to test this with?
So I think there's actually two questions. To Brian's point, if you're testing whether or not having all of that, doing that work for somebody would actually sort of put them in business, like take them off the sideline and put them in the game, if that's the essence of your test, one way you might do that would be to tell people, hey, look, I've already created a business. It's ready to go. I've already I've filed everything. You can sort of acquire it from me, and you become the new owner of it. Right now, with little to no work, it's $1,500 to get a ready-to-go turnkey company. And in theory, they would say, great, that was the thing keeping me off from getting into the game. So I'll totally take you up on that offer. And then, yeah, I just tweak my name and a few things, and there's nothing for me to think about. I'm just sort of acquiring an operating business. And in theory, you guys could create one of those businesses. You could go through all the hassle, the paperwork, you could do it all and see if you could sort of, I don't want to use the word sell the business or acquire it, but you're positioning it to the user that there's zero work for them. They're just grabbing something that's already operational and running with it. And to Brian's point, that would sort of indicate that, yeah, I was going to start a business, but I didn't because that was really difficult. Now, the second part might be that just going after people who have already decided to start a business, and then they're in this phase of like, well, okay, how do I go about all this paperwork? That might be slightly different. That's a classic concierge type scenario where you could just find those people, find anybody who started a business right away who's right on that cusp, and just say, hey, for some small fee, we'll do it for you. We'll actually take all your information, we'll intake it. You guys will record what that process is like, see how difficult it is for the customer to answer the questions, how difficult it is for them to gather the information, all that good stuff. You'll take that information from him, you'll go run to the state and file whatever needs to be filed. You'll actually do the work, record that process, and then bring the final documents back to him or her and say, okay, we did it. There may be other questions, and you just got to keep doing that process over and over so you understand what it takes before you go automate it. That might be another way to do it if your premise was that you'll save time and energy for the small business owner. So either one of those cases would solve sort of different ways that you're framing up the problem. I actually think Brian's point about, is this really somebody who is on the sidelines and you're trying to get in the game versus somebody who is already starting and that you're going to help, is probably a fundamental question. So deciding that too might help you.
Great,
yeah,
thank you.
If you're using UCLA as an example, if UCLA, there were, because I have two daughters that go there, so I'll use it as an example. If you have 1,000 college students that start a business coming out of UCLA every year, I think the success for your team would be just in that one college, 1,100 or 1,500 businesses that come out the next year because of what you created. So the question is not the 1,000 that already were going to go into business, but how do you get 500 more? And what's stopping those 500 people that are, to Ben's point, that are kind of, that are, that almost are ready to start a business? And is your primary thinking, well, it's the paperwork and the hassle, and if that was done, they would do it? And if that's the case, then that you would want to test, I think, with those 500 people that are pretty close.
Yeah, there's probably some student groups on those campuses you could go. You could make your test cells, right? There's probably an entrepreneur club. There's probably a startup club, and probably young whatevers. Yeah, exactly. Go to those clubs and put it as a challenge to them and see if you can get them telling you what they need. And actually, I got to jump to my next meeting, but since I'm like literally probably one building away from you guys, if you ever want to have lunch, I'm more than happy to have lunch and spend a lot more time with you guys. So track me down.
On video. Do it on video, Ben.
I'll do it on video.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hey, thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate it. And I didn't get a chance to thank Brian. We jumped right into the coaching side of things, but Brian, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us all of your wisdom and experience. Is there, if folks wanted to be able to connect with you, learn more about what you're doing with LoyaltyRocks, maybe they want some help as well, how can they connect with you?
At LoyaltyRocks is my Twitter, and you can find me through there. That's probably the easiest.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to all the people that are watching, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.